Hello and welcome to a brand new world building adventure. This is a multi part miniseries where we are going over a chunk of my world with a fine tooth comb. We'll talk about nomenclature, statistics, and demographics only the nerdiest game nerd will be able to appreciate. We're getting into all the gruesome details. Some will be highlighted, others just touched on. Will be repetitious at times, always with the intent of getting way out into the weeds of our craft. Along the way, maybe I'll miss something. It could happen. If it does, open your mouth and flex those fingers. Call me out. I'm telling you now, if you want to know more about anything, leave a comment. We're talking zoology, physics, geology, oceanography, economics, all the amazing stuff that creates a world your audience can immerse themselves in. My name is Lewis Nichols. I've been around gaming since way before it was cool. I've published an RPG and a few short stories. I've owned my own collectibles business. I'm the kind of weirdo that spends a whole day researching candle making just to get a better idea for what kind of world my characters live in. I would never claim to know everything about everything, but when it comes to fantasy world building, you can trust me. Oh, it's hot. Are they going to be able to tell I don't have any pants on? Oh, you're here. Where was it? Oh, yeah. This being part one, we're going to start with the basics. We're going to talk about how we got here from several different perspectives. We are going to visit the map room and look at some founding documents. This is going to be exciting stuff. Let's start with a quick word on my own journey in gaming. Started in high school, played a little bit of first edition. I don't really count that. It's pretty minor stuff. No idea what I was doing. No concept of role playing. Where it started was Oklahoma State University. Go Pokes. It wasn't planned. I swear it. It's on my own floor, in my own dorm, minding my own business. And there was this door, and it was open. Bunch of guys sitting around a table, all these weird frickin' dice, a lot of smoke in the room. And there was this guy behind a screen, and they were hunting dragons, or orcs, or something. Oh, Lord, I was hooked. And not just on the smoking. That's bad, kids. Don't smoke. By the end of that semester, I had gotten me this big old honking piece of graph paper, and I drew my first map. Pelakar was born. That was 1986 when I started. Advanced D&D. Completely different game, really, in a lot of ways. That was back whenever your mage with his D4 hit points, magic missile, done for the day. Your fighters were the star of the show until later levels. I realize there are still some similarities, but you just had that one magic using class. You didn't have the sorcerers and the witches, and I don't know, I still don't play that much 5e. I've got a bard. I'm back into it. Yeah, it was college, and we played a lot. I mean, a lot. Way too much. Focus on your schoolwork, guys. Then play. And once you start playing, never give it up. Never. All right, I'm tangent again. I know. So, graduated from college. Bunch of immature young men. Got into the real world. Didn't want to give up our childhoods. In our mid-20s, we published a game. Don't feel bad that you haven't heard of it. Don't feel bad that I've mentioned the name of the game and you still haven't heard of it. It wasn't very good. We had some fun doing it. We were young. We were dumb. It was a great experience. 10 years later, as actual adults, we had the best campaign of our lives. It was wonderful. All our experiences and friendship from the past brought forward into a mature and adult setting. A lot of fun, a lot of wonderful topics, a lot of incredible role playing. We refined the rules, changed them a lot. Honestly, D&D to the original Pellicar gaming system wasn't that big of a step. The published Pellicar gaming system to what we ended up with, huge step. I still believe that that game system, the game system that Dresden's Tale is set in, could be one of the best ever designed. But it's not really designed. There's huge holes in it. Lots of things were never flushed out. Brings us to Dresden's Tale. He was originally a thought experiment. We had changed the rules a lot, never really changed the characters. So they'd been morphed up to the, 10th, 12th level. I wanted to see what it was like growing from 0 level. Well, 1st level. And that was Dresden. A few hundred words each month on how he was progressing. Eventually, that turned into a story. It's still a diary entry type of story. And from Dresden's Tale came the continuation of the world building project that had started with that map back in 1986. And yes, I know you can't see that map. It's ancient, it's faded, it's got crap that's been spilled on it, the edges are tattered. It's a mess. You'll get the close up, you'll see it's a mess. As I said, the original writing, sketchy. The first 3 volumes on the channel, if you've listened to them, it's about 100,000 words. Kind of 3 short stories. There was probably 10,000 words in the original document, if that. My whole first document, we've barely gotten into in the story. These days, I have the opposite problem. I don't know what I'm going to do when I get farther into the series. Right now, Dresden's Tale is about 22 documents, each one about 100,000 words. So, yeah, that's a lot. Still very much a kind of a rough draft form. I have good years and bad years working on the project. So, that's where the Silver Sentinels comes from. The Silver Sentinels is not a Dresden project. I barely talk about the Celts. They're a little bit into it because, well, I was going to have to world build this area anyway, so why not make it into a bunch of YouTube videos? Seems like that would be the, YouTuber thing to do. They will come up from time to time, especially when I talk about the parts of the Silver Sentinels where they're active. But they're not who we're getting into. Who we're getting into is the original culture of the Silver Sentinels. How they develop, what kind of governments they have, what kind of adventuring they do, how they look at the world, different than Dresden's Tale. If you kept up with Dresden's Tale, a lot of those concepts are not real friendly to RPGs. I'm not going to go into that because once again, we're not talking about Dresden's Tale. However, Silver Sentinels are the kind of place you could run a campaign. You could put together a standard adventuring team. You're going to have different groups to interact with. It's not completely polarized to one side or the other. This is my sandbox. I hope you enjoy it. We're going to get into a lot of details, and I've said this a million times. Leave comments. I would be happy to make this a one-on-one experience. I don't have a lot of listeners early on. If you're seeing this years from now when I have thousands of views instead of 1 or 2 views, then I might, these may not apply. But for now, leave a comment. I'll respond to you. You might get a whole video. All right, Silver Sentinels, let's go. At first glance, Pellicar is Earth-like. It's an elongated sphere, makes the mapping a little easier, but you can't really tell from the surface. Yes, you can see a little bit farther to the north and to the south, but it's not some crazy physical change that requires a whole new way of thinking. Its weather patterns are maintained by weather spirits, but appear normal. It's huge, the size of Uranus, but gravity doesn't work the same. So again, normal. About the gravity, it usually doesn't even matter. Characters are not going to notice when they throw a baseball or an orc, because you have to be an astrophysicist to really get into that sort of thing, and there's a severe shortage of top-end scientists on Pellicar. More normalcy for the shade of the sun is a nice comforting yellow, and the day is close enough to 24 hours you don't even need to change the clocks. We have 3 moons. That's kind of weird. Sometimes it gets bright at night, but it doesn't mess up the ecosystems on a worldly basis. There are volcanoes, earthquakes, typhoons, droughts, meteor strikes, and spiders. All the terrors of Earth. Of course, this is fantasy, so there's a lot more too, and we'll be talking about most of that stuff as it comes up. In reference to my channel as a whole, you're going to hear me talk about Dresden's Tale, off and on, all the time. You're going to hear about the Celts. However, I promise you, I'm going to pretend that this series is the first thing that you've ever heard about my world. It doesn't much matter anyway. The rest of the channel, Dresden's Tale, and the associated material have to do with the lands and the realms that Dresden is involved in. This is different. It's obviously connected. And when connections do come up, I'll mention it. In Dungeons & Dragons terms, Pellicar would be the prime material plane. If you prefer the circus, it's center stage. In nuclear war, ground zero. Now that we have that all out of the way, let's zoom in to the Silver Sentinels. Well, almost. One more thing. Pellicar is cyclical. The symbiosis of divinity and man forms a new age, and it takes shape. For a few thousand years, civilization grows, warriors become strong, society develops, and then everything fails. There's a lot of reasons for this. Often an age ends simply because mortals have come to control too much power. In some ages, they've harnessed magics sufficient to ravage populations. In others, the fall is external as off-plane powers exert themselves onto the central plane. Regardless of the mechanism, the end of the age, or the beginning, can be a time of geological turmoil. The Silver Sentinels were formed roughly 9,000 years prior to our show. It was early in an age, as the pantheons themselves were forming. Gods of silver coalesced from the collective unconscious and found the world lacking. As their first worshippers began to develop the faith, the gods forged these minor continents and seeded them with life and wealth. Now maybe it was 7 minutes, maybe it was 7 days, could have been 7 years. I'm not really sure. They were gods after all, capable of great things, but totally committed to living life on their own clock. Spirits were set with the task of getting the ecosystems going and planting ores in the ground. Sometimes this was tedious work, literally bringing in the metals and gems from the elemental nodes in the astral and sprinkling them into the lands of the Sentinels. In other cases, they used processes more Earth-like. Land masses were shoved and jostled, creating great pressure and giving birth to volcanoes, and everything that comes with them. This is most noticeable where no one can see it, the ocean floor. Each continent has its own shelf with wide, deep oceans in between. Muddling the issue is the fact the sea floor is its own zonal shelf, which eventually drops off into the abyssal depths of Pellicar's wide, deep oceans. For the most part, the continental shelves are relatively thin, stretching out an average of 40 miles with depths of around 200 feet. The zonal plain ranges from 800 to 1100 feet in depth, with a number of ravines being much, much deeper. These are generally at points of separation where the region is slowly coming apart. Those coastal shelves favor coral, but there are shores where seagrasses are the rule. Life flourishes, and the majority of Elito civilization clings to the coasts and depends on the seas. World building always occupies a place in time, as well as a spot on the map. For our purposes, we're going to call it year 20. That's by the new Celt calendar. By their old calendar, it's 2067 years after the fall. According to the Aussie, the year of unity is 40. And it's year 16 in most northern calendars. And now, the weather. Tropical is the rule for the Silver Sentinels, though rains are tame compared to the images that might spring to mind. Across the zone, 30 inches of annual rainfall is pretty normal. In the east, central, and southeast areas, totals are higher. Winds are generally from the north, but with some variance depending upon where you're at and the time of year. The extreme north will see winter snow in the mountains. Lowland snow is possible up there, but it's not common. What about flora and fauna? In such a large area, it's hard to generalize. As a basic rule, reptiles are more common and mammals less so. The seas are fertile, whales being pretty normal. Mosasaur-like seagoing reptiles are around, which we will call, cleverly, the mosasaur. However, just about every other sea monster you can imagine has a home somewhere in these vast seas. Plant life varies greatly from continent to continent, but trees are in short supply. That's partially due to logging, but there would be a relative scarcity in good lumber even with no people. Velito and ethnicity. Alright, first of all, Velito. That is my term for the levelable races. Elves, humans, halflings, Ryan, whole bunch of different races. Or species, as I prefer to call them, kind of use them both interchangeably. Pretty much every major species of Velito is around somewhere in the Sentinels, but overall, the big winners in demographics are elves, dwarves, gnomes, and the Ranayan. Humans, Minotaur, and Tagara also have strong populations, but let's face it, they do everywhere. Local concentrations will be mentioned by region, as will ethnicities, but the only real losers are mountain folk and Equirta, the latter of which is relegated to only a fair share in limited areas. Individual ethnic groups are covered in the continental episodes where they are most closely associated. Politics. In year 20, the most common forms of governments are monarchies, oligarchies, and tyrannies. In some cases, there is a concept of divine right. Usually, rule is just propped up by raw military or economic force. These governments, however, hold very little sway over the sea lanes and the merchants who sail them. Local shipping guilds and other non-governmental entities hold substantial amounts of power and will be discussed in areas where they apply. Technology. A need for big fleets and a lack of wood are not a great combination, but the residents of the Silver Sentinels make do. Ships are extremely valuable, and the greatest crimes in most ports are putting them in danger. Large investments in construction has also pushed forward associated technologies ahead of their time. On the one hand, it's sometimes hard to find a good ironworker. Bronze working is the norm. On the other hand, great wind-driven galleys ply the seas. Magic, agriculture, engineering, and the sciences are all very much in the realm of Earth's ancient cultures. Hey, I just remembered. These are the Silver Sentinels. Yes, there's a lot of silver in the Silver Sentinels. In fact, nearly every continent has at least one major Earth spirit totally committed to keeping the supplies up. It's enough to affect economies, especially in the years after first contact. Most regional governments don't even value it enough to make it a currency. Instead, gold pieces or backed currency are more common. Merchants new to the region might be excited at all the silver they can trade for, but before you know it, the value of their own money has dropped. Luckily for the rest of the world, most of it anyway, this is an isolated region, and high-volume trade is a rarity. Now what about the arts? History is lacking, as language rarely survives the dark ages of Pelakar. Books and other deposits of knowledge are literally stripped from the world by metaphysical forces that regulate the gaps between prosperity. In some cases, new ancient references are even created to replace and debunk what actually was true. A new oral and written tradition has risen in the Sentinels. At the moment, long-form poetry is in favor. This is the most likely form of entertainment to be found in public theaters. Often it is adapted into shorter verses that are sung in less cultured establishments. It's considered the vulgar form of high art and thus is extremely popular. In the world of paint and brush, portraits are the norm, with a close runner-up being scenes of harbors or individual ships. Religious subjects in poetry and painting are just beginning to grow in commonality. By far, the most likely way to earn a living in the arts in year 20 is as a portrait painter, a poet, or someone with the voice to recite somebody else's work. It might be fantasy, but the usual dangers are still the most deadly. On the leaderboard, we have infection, childbirth, illness, and spiders. Because we all agree spiders are the main source of evil, right? Poisonous reptiles are an ever-present danger for field workers or any job that gets you into their natural element. Far more interesting entries include various forms of the alligator. We'll talk more about these guys later, including some fun fantasy types. Sticking with the fantasy realm, there are homicidal dangers lurking in the urban zones of the Silver Sentinels. In the north, where they're most common, they are referred to as night terrors. Not well understood, their nature is clouded by fear and ignorance. The night terrors are a number of different dangers all mingled into one for the sake of healthy nightmares. They are all dangerous, but the fear they sow is probably worse than their actual body count. First among them is the dream lich. Not a true lich, but actually an intelligent worm that cocoons itself into a dark corner and feeds on the mental energy of any sentient being within 1,000 feet. Shadow drakes are a simple flying reptile that strike in the night. They are capable of carrying away sheep, goats, or elves with ease. Often they leave no trace but the screams of their victim trailing off into the darkened sky. Last of the three most prominent night terrors, and my personal favorite, are the closet creepers. These other dimensional beings are from the astral plane, but capable of crossing over. Their favorite tactic is to find a victim and wait for them to fall asleep. The victim is then lured with psychic enticement into the creature's grasp and transported to their nest. There, the victims are made slaves and eventually fed upon. You know you can do it, but if you can't, the Metrican can, the Metrican can. Alright, the Metrican isn't anything like that, but sometimes these tunes just stick in my head. The Metrican is a big-ass floating island. Let me relate a story about one of the Celts' first encounters with this interesting phenomenon. When the Duchess of Parnfastile was told about floating islands, she dismissed the idea as a novelty of the oceans. The Celts she led would soon be spreading out from Aussie, and they could investigate then. In the spring of the year 20 by the new calendar, 2067 years after the fall by the old, she learned different. What she discovered was the Metricans were in fact an airborne phenomenon. They are rare over Aussie. In fact, they are not particularly common anywhere in the Silver Sentinels. Even in the east, where they are most usual, one might expect to see one like we expect to see comets. A good view is something most of us can only expect 3 or 4 times in their lifetime. The Duchess's Metrican was small, only a few hundred feet across. Some are miles wide, big enough to support an entire ecosystem. They ignore the wind, driven by leftover magical energies that no one in the Silver Sentinels can explain. Most cruise at altitudes of 10,000 to 20,000 feet. Just for the record, on Pelicar breathing is not a problem at that altitude. Now for those of you paying attention, this can put them into conflict with mountains. I wonder what would happen. Nope, never mind. Forget I said that. You guys have any questions? It's possible that we will cover your concerns in an upcoming episode. Just ask in the comments. You can do it now, or you can do it 15 years from now, whenever you see this video. I will always try to respond to your concerns. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that like button. That's the kind of stuff that gives me the will to keep producing, and helps my videos become more visible so others can take notice. I'm so glad that you could all stop in today, and I will see you next time. Cheers.